Welcome to this week's VLSI Insider. This is Dan Hutchison.
This is Andre Alati.
This is Jason Abt.
And this is Risto Puhakka.
So, welcome to the program, Jason. If any of you have read our press release or whatnot, we were acquired by TechInsights, and Jason is the CTO of TechInsights. So he really knows what's going on inside the chips themselves. So we've brought him here to talk about it. So welcome to your first VLSI Insider.
Thanks very much for having me. I am so glad and honored to be part of the team. It's great. I really appreciate it and can't wait to see what we can do together.
It's exciting too for us because you bring a lot of really deep technical insights into what's going on. So what is going on out there?
Well, as you said, I mean, there's so much going on. We could probably spend a couple of hours, but some of the highlights that we've seen over the last few weeks, really, is what we've seen in the latest AMD Ryzen processors. So AMD has been talking about their chiplet design now for some time, and I mean, in my view, it's really going to be a game changer in terms of performance. The bandwidth you get between the processor and the memory architecture from the chiplet design should be outstanding. So when we opened up the latest Ryzen processor, which isn't yet chiplet, that's expected later this year, we were actually surprised to see that it's ready to go for a chiplet design. What do I mean by that? Well, they've actually laid out the chip with real estate for and even inclusion of the TSV matrix. So it's raring to go. I mean, it makes perfect sense in hindsight. They've de-risked some of the production. It means that they can kind of stagger the release, and of course it gives me a whole lot of confidence that we're actually going to see production chiplet design in GPU by the end of this year.
So that's pretty fascinating. So,
it is. The densities that we're seeing from the Ryzen is kind of jaw-dropping. From a production standpoint, huge complications, and AMD working with TSMC on this architecture, this design, they've overcome a lot of technical challenges. So it was great to see it in production.
So TechInsights also follows the IP space in a big way.
That's right.
What are you seeing there? Is there anything new with the Nvidia ARM deal? We talked about that a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So when it was announced that SoftBank was going to be divesting ARM from their portfolio, there was a lot of speculation in the industry of where that would land. And as most people know, ARM is one of the biggest IP core providers, licensors for our industry. ARM cores are found in everything all around us, and there's a lot of speculation of where it would ultimately land. Nvidia came out on top, and it has been tracking. The deal has been tracking with an expectation of closing. However, in the last couple of weeks, perhaps a bit of a speed bump. We're hearing news out of the UK that there are now concerns from the government that maybe this deal isn't quite so good for ARM as a business, and of course for the UK economy. So what's going to come of it? It's hard to say. I mean, my personal expectation is that the deal will end up going through. There'll be maybe some compromises made. And of course, once that happens, Nvidia is in such a position of strength between its really, world-class, obviously, architecture design in parallel compute, not just in GPU, but of course, we're seeing their architectures in other spaces. And now with the inclusion of the ARM IP portfolio, they're in pretty good shape. And, between the AMD success with the Ryzen and soon to be the chiplets with Nvidia, Intel they got a lot of work to do. I mean, their Ponte Vecchio is coming soon, and from everything that we've heard, is extremely high performance. But it's a pretty big bar, or pretty high bar to meet. So it's going to be a fascinating race, and I mean, it's always fun to be in this industry.
It's quite
Yeah.
interesting that the discussion is that Intel needs to meet the bar or exceed it, which is somebody else set up the standard to. It's quite a change on the discussion point, so to speak.
It is, and of course,
Yeah.
Intel has shown before. I mean, when they make the investments that they need, and they combine their microarchitecture understanding and their design expertise with the semiconductor fabrication piece of it, I mean, they can do wonders. So not at all discounted, right? They're certainly a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah, and the packaging news is actually exciting. Just lending to the equipment side, in a sense, the advanced packaging equipment market is on fire. And of course, AMD is fabbed at TSMC, packaging interconnect built at TSMC. Those high density TSVs take a lot of equipment.
They do.
Editors, PVD, metallization tools. So it's a pretty interesting from that perspective as well. It's right here this year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Andrea, what's going on with the forecast? You just did a new forecast update.
It's up again. Well, we just.
Well, you didn't change semiconductors, right?
Well, we just got all the quarterly data from both semiconductor equipment and IC makers, and actually, as far as Q2 is concerned, our numbers were pretty much spot on, so we didn't really have to change anything in the second quarter. It was more the outlook for the equipment market, where basically we increased the forecast from 31% to 41%. We're just seeing a lot of momentum there. I mean, and it's across the board. Logic is doing very well. You have foundries still very aggressive in their spending. Memory is also very, very strong. And again, it's both leading edge, trailing edge, so it's all over the place. So basically what ended up happening is that we added another $8 billion in the second half. It just shows you, I mean, how strong the momentum has been for the equipment makers. And if you look at our order activity that we publish on weekly basis, we're at 110 degrees. So basically, bookings are going to be much higher. And I think that that 42% is more than doable given what's happening in the equipment market. On the IC market, on the other hand, we pretty much left things as they were. Q2 numbers met our expectations. And also what we're seeing there, the momentum is pretty much coming in line with our views. If anything, we're seeing a little bit of a slowing momentum, especially in the second half. But again, if you compare first half of this year to last year, we're looking at two different base numbers. So, you have to be very careful. In the second half, things get a little bit more, easy to compare, but still, we're looking at about 26% growth for semiconductors, which is still a very, very high growth rate. And lastly, electronics also got a pretty nice increase from, I think, 11% to 15%. Again, a lot of strength in the second quarter. But in the second half, again, we are thinking that things will slow down because, again, the base numbers change quite a bit between the two halves, essentially. And we are seeing things there slow down in certain sectors like PCs and some of the consumer areas.
Yeah,
but
definitely.
Overall, great year. And I think even for next year, especially on the equipment side, we still expect a pretty good year with equipment growing, in the high single digits. And I think that we're going to see pretty much similar performance on the semiconductor side. So yeah, so again, a little bit higher than what we thought, but still within our expectations.
Yeah, it is interesting because we're seeing on the semiconductor analytics side, there's definitely a slowing, plenty of signs of slowing. But then the question is it a statistical artifact, just like we're seeing with inflation, where, we're coming off that steep decline last year and the huge jump at the beginning of this year to the rise at the second half of last year and the rise today. So Risto, all these equipment sales this year and everything, are the orders there to keep going?
Oh yeah, it's number one thing is actually when Andrea was describing the equipment, which crossed my mind, was that the industry was actually supply chain constrained. One concern early part of the year, we were like, how much the supply chain can actually deliver, equipment supply chain, and they keep increasing their capacity, from that perspective, able to meet those 40% numbers. So, and we have a forecast update coming along for the equipment side. It really will be released next week. Just the preliminary hints. The WFE going to be over 40% growth for the year. Assembly equipment 50% growth for this year. Test about 40% as well. Equipment service in the 30% range. And next year looks about middle single digit growth rate. That's basically where the numbers are settling for next year. There is a lot of momentum in the marketplace. It's
of course, that's what we had for this year back in December.
Good on that.
But let me.
But we got to be honest. It's been a really difficult forecasting period. Whenever it's this far out of whack, it's.
Let me put it this way. It would be very hard to see like double-digit growth rate for equipment. Of course, it can happen, but it would be kind of out of the ratios big time. So
how close are we hitting the magical $100 billion bar and crossing that?
We are next year is, 100 billion for WFE.
Yeah, for semiconductor equipment, we're over that. We're at 130 for this.
Total semiconductor equipment is 130, but WFE 100 billion. We are at the striking distance already next year. It's if there is a positive growth numbers, it can reach next year or 23.
Wow.
Actually,
I remember the big news around 1980 was that we'd crossed $1 billion in semiconductor equipment. So we're finally going to make it to 100.
One point that we debated earlier about our forecast, when we had that 32% growth, was really the capacity side. If the equipment market had the ability to provide enough equipment for that growth. So, we went back and forth, and the 40% seemed a little bit far-fetched initially because I just didn't think there was enough capacity in place. But apparently the equipment market and equipment suppliers have figured out a way to squeeze out whatever they can to, hit those numbers essentially, because again, those are very big numbers. And again, if you look at last year, equipment market was already up about 18% or so. So it's coming off of a very good year to begin with. It's not that it came off a, downturn. So
Andrea, one thing you have to remember that what the Jason said, the products like the AMDs, the new GPU, those drive the equipment sale. That's going to be a hot product out there. It's already not, but that's really the key driver.
Yeah, that's the fun thing about it is what reminds me of is those early 80s when there was just new technology after new technology after new technology, and it was just driving an explosion of equipment. And then we went to that dull period in the 90s and 2000 where everything was about productivity and it shrunk the equipment market. And now the technology demands are what's driving a much larger equipment market going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. We're certainly not going to be in any kind of a stagnant period from a technology innovation standpoint. Dan, you and I were talking just beforehand that, just looking at the processor market, it is segmenting like mad right now. And what we're going to see is optimization in each of these different segments, even just in terms of fabrication, which of course is going to just drive demand for the equipment all the more. TSV in my mind is just the beginning, and we're a hair's breadth away from going from FinFET to gate all around and beyond. It's exciting times.
Yeah. Well, we've run out of time, guys. Thanks again for doing this with me.
Thank you,
I really appreciate it.
We're going to have
thanks,
fun years ahead of us with your technology side and our market statistics.